Millfield, Oregon. 1960, population 3,247 inhabitants. A small town surrounded by dense forests and mist-covered mountains where everyone knows each other by name, and secrets are whispered behind the lace curtains of Victorian houses. But in October 1960, Millfield would become the setting of a story that would connect lives in ways no one could imagine. A story about destiny, separation, and an unwavering faith that would defy time itself. This is the first of 6 stories, 6 lives intertwined by a single moment in time, and it all began with 3 heartbeats, identical ones. Margaret Collins was 24 years old when she discovered she was carrying life within her. Married to Thomas, a coal miner with calloused hands and a gentle heart, she had waited 3 long years for this moment. As the months passed, Margaret noticed her belly was growing larger than normal. Dr. Helena Morrison, the town's only obstetrician, suspected it might be twins. Margaret's uterus was larger than it should be for the gestational age, and sometimes she could detect heartbeats that seemed to come from different places. But in 1960, in a small town like Millfield, there was no way to be absolutely certain. Without ultrasound or advanced technology, Margaret and Thomas lived in anticipation of a big surprise on delivery day. Thomas worked in the mines of Cooper Creek, a neighboring town just 12 kilometers from Millfield. Every day, he made the round trip with other men from the region, returning home with his face covered in black dust, but always with a smile for Margaret and her mysterious belly. "How many do you think there are?" he would joke, placing his hands on Margaret's belly. 1, 2, maybe even 3. It was a loving joke. Triplets were extremely rare, almost a miracle. But fate had other plans. On August 15, 1960, exactly 2 months before the babies were to be born, a collapse in the Cooper Creek mines changed everything. Thomas Collins and 7 other miners never came home again. The accident didn't just take lives. During the collapse, tons of heavy ore, lead, arsenic, and other toxic metals were thrown directly into the Cascade River, the main water source that served both Cooper Creek and Millfield. Margaret, devastated by the loss of Thomas, found support in her neighbor and best friend, Joyce Patterson, an experienced nurse who lived next door. Joyce had lost her husband in the war and understood Margaret's pain better than anyone. During the following 2 months, Joyce cared for Margaret like a sister. She helped with shopping, cooked for her, attended medical appointments as a companion. Together, they prepared for the arrival of 1 baby, or perhaps 2. October 15, 1960. 4 a.m. Margaret's contractions began just as the first cases of what would become known as the Millfield outbreak arrived at the hospital. Joyce Patterson, as a hospital nurse, had been called for an emergency shift. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, 67 years old, had been admitted with severe nausea, body aches, and sudden fainting spells. 2 hours later, it was young Danny O'Sullivan's turn, with shortness of breath and convulsions. When Margaret arrived at the hospital in labor, the corridors were already crowded. Dr. Morrison had never seen anything like it. The symptoms were uniform, violent nausea, intense muscle pain, sudden fainting spells, and shortness of breath that left patients panicked. But she couldn't stop a delivery to investigate an epidemic. The labor was long and difficult. Margaret fought not only against contractions, but against fear of what was happening around her. Between waves of pain, she heard groans coming from other rooms, saw nurses running through the corridors. Joyce divided her time between caring for Margaret, her best friend, and helping with the growing crisis. She held Margaret's hand, whispering words of encouragement. At 6:23 p.m., the first baby arrived in the world with a strong cry. Joyce and Dr. Morrison looked at each other. He was larger than expected for a possible twin. At 6:31 p.m., the second baby was born, a girl. Margaret cried with joy, but something in Dr. Morrison's expression made her pay attention. "Margaret," the doctor said, with her hands still on Margaret's belly, "prepare yourself. There's one more." At 6:44 p.m., the third miracle arrived in the world. Triplets. In small Millfield, Oregon, amid a public health crisis, 3 siblings had been born. October 17, 1960. Margaret was recovering from childbirth when doctors from Portland arrived with a terrible discovery. Dr. James Mitchell, a contamination specialist, had made the connection no one wanted to believe. The symptoms weren't from a disease. It was heavy metal poisoning. And the source was the water everyone drank, cooked with, and bathed in every day. The accident at the Cooper Creek mines, the same one that had taken Thomas's life, had contaminated the Cascade River with toxic levels of lead, arsenic, and mercury. For 2 months, these substances had been silently accumulating in people's bodies. Dr. Mitchell was categorical. All babies in the hospital needed to be transferred immediately to St. Mary's Hospital in Pine Valley, 30 kilometers away. The small Millfield hospital couldn't handle newborns amid a contamination crisis. Joyce Patterson, even feeling the first effects of contamination, nausea that came in waves and exhaustion she had never felt, knew she couldn't abandon her post. Margaret was too weak to leave her bed. The babies needed someone who knew them during the transfer, but Joyce was an experienced nurse. She had worked in military hospitals, had seen how emergencies could create fatal confusion. And looking at the chaos around her, papers scattered, records lost in the rush, overworked nurses, she realized something terrible. In the transfer, the triplets could be lost forever. In the early hours of the 18th, before the ambulances arrived, Joyce Patterson made the most important decision of her life. Alone in the nursery, she took a small surgical instrument and, with the care and precision of 15 years of nursing, made a unique mark on each of the triplets. 3 small dots forming a perfect triangle in the same location on each child's body. Samuel, Sarah, Simon. She whispered the names while making each mark, her hands trembling not only from contamination, but from the responsibility of what she was doing. For Margaret, for Thomas, so you'll never be completely lost. A triangle, 3 points, 3 siblings. If you're enjoying this video, please click the like button so YouTube can share it with more people. And if you enjoy this type of video, please subscribe to our channel. When Joyce arrived at St. Mary's Hospital with the 8 babies from Millfield, she encountered a situation even worse than she had imagined. The hospital, which normally served a population of 8,000 people with its 11 nursery beds, suddenly found itself overwhelmed. 11 babies were already hospitalized for various reasons, and now 8 more were arriving at once, without proper identification due to the chaos of emergency transfers. The head nurse at St. Mary's, Mrs. Dorothy Clark, a pragmatic 52-year-old woman, faced an impossible dilemma. There wasn't enough physical space to separate the newly arrived babies from those already in the hospital. Nurse Patterson, Mrs. Clark said to Joyce, the Pine Valley community has already mobilized to help. Childless families have offered to temporarily care for these children until the situation normalizes. Joyce felt her heart race. She knew exactly what this meant. The triplets, mixed with 18 other babies, would be distributed to different families without anyone, except her, knowing which ones were siblings. Over the next 48 hours, Joyce watched helplessly as 19 different families from Pine Valley came to the hospital. Couples who had dreamed of children for years, families who had lost babies previously, people who simply wanted to help amid the crisis. One by one, the children were being temporarily entrusted to the care of these families. When Margaret finally was discharged and arrived at St. Mary's 3 days later, the nursery was empty. "Where are the children?" Margaret asked, looking at the empty cribs with an expression Joyce would never forget. Mrs. Clark explained the situation as gently as possible. "Mrs. Collins, we understand your pain, but we have no way to identify which babies were yours. They're being well cared for by community families, but legally, without proper documentation." Margaret collapsed. Joyce held her friend as she cried, knowing she carried a secret that could change everything, but that it wasn't yet time to reveal. In the weeks that followed, Margaret lived any mother's nightmare. Lawyers were consulted, lawsuits were filed, investigations were conducted. But the legal reality was merciless. Without documentation, without reliable witnesses, without any tangible proof, it was impossible to prove which of the 19 children distributed throughout the Pine Valley community were her triplets. Joyce accompanied Margaret through every attempt, every frustration. She carried the weight of knowing the truth, but also the responsibility of protecting the three families who now loved those babies as their own children. During long nights of tea and conversation, Joyce always repeated the same words of hope. "Margaret, I won't stop helping you find your children. That time will come, I promise. One day you'll have them in your arms again." The years passed. Margaret never completely gave up, but learned to live with the pain. Joyce kept her notebook and her secret like a treasure, and something interesting began to happen. Gradually, 3 of the families who had adopted children during the crisis began moving to Millfield. In 1963, the Henderson family bought the old Collins farm, which Margaret could no longer maintain. They arrived with a 3-year-old boy everyone came to know as David Henderson. In 1965, the Rodriguez family opened a small Mexican restaurant on Millfield's main street, bringing with them a cheerful 5-year-old girl named Sofia Rodriguez. And in 1967, the O'Sullivan family took over the town's traditional bakery, with their son Michael O'Sullivan, then 7 years old. Margaret, who had moved to a small house in the town center, avoided places where she knew she might encounter children. The park, schools at dismissal time, community festivals, all these places awakened an emptiness in her chest that was almost unbearable. Joyce continued working as a nurse, now at the town's small health clinic, and every time a child came in for checkups or vaccinations, she discreetly searched for small marks, scars, any sign that might indicate the triplets. But checkup after checkup, child after child, Joyce never found the triangular marks. Sometimes lying in bed at night, she questioned herself, what if the scars disappeared? What if my plan didn't work? What if we'll never be able to identify them again? And so in October 1960, 3 babies became children of different families. Samuel became David Henderson, Sarah became Sofia Rodriguez, and Simon became Michael O'Sullivan. They grew up in Millfield, Oregon, with new names, new identities, not knowing they were siblings, not knowing their biological mother lived just a few blocks away, always waiting for a sign, for a clue, for a miracle. Margaret Collins built a new life in small Millfield, avoiding places that awakened the pain of separation, but always with silent hope in her heart, fed by Joyce's promises. Joyce Patterson continued her work as a nurse, guarding the most precious secret of her professional life, but also carrying the uncertainty that her plan might have failed. The 3 adoptive families prospered in the welcoming town. The Hendersons on the farm, the Rodriguez family with their restaurant that became the heart of the Latino community, the O'Sullivans providing daily bread for the entire town, and the children grew, strong, loved, happy, each carrying on their body a mark that neither they nor their adoptive families could completely explain. 12 years would pass, 12 years of separate lives, but connected by invisible threads of destiny. And in October 1972, a unique opportunity would arise for these threads to cross again. This was the first story of Millfield, 6 stories that connect like the points of a triangle, waiting to become one. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel and share our video to help us spread our stories.